Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Yusuf Abdul-Qadir, and it is an honor to be here today to show support for Senator Sanders. Before I introduce my panelists, I do want to say one of the other colleagues here is going to be a little late. Latrell Dunbar, she has some trouble with her car, and so she'll be here as soon as she can. And I hope that we do get an opportunity to hear from her because her voice is something that is can echo more concretely and be added to the voices that are here. Before I introduce the two gentlemen to my right and left, I do want to say just a little something about the importance of this election and why this election is not only something important for the African American community, but in fact for all of the country, in fact because of America's standing in the world. We're at a time in our country's history where we cannot afford incrementalism at this point. We're at a time in our country's history where there's a massive amount of inequality, where there's massive amounts of civil unrest, particularly pertaining to police and community relations, where we have a ballooned criminal justice system that has disproportionately affected African Americans and Latinos, where we are not able to have a student body that is competitive in an interconnected global economy, where climate change is the single biggest threat to our country's national security. In all of these issues, taking the moderate step, taking the half-paced step, taking the middle ground is unacceptable. We cannot afford it. We can't afford it. Our country can't afford it. Future generations of Americans can't afford it. And if we're going to truly be a more perfect union, then we need to radically shift the politics of our country and address these issues directly and more forcefully. And so, to my left is Maurice Brown, U.S. Army Reservist, student leader at SUNY Syracuse in Onondaga Community College, and a Sanders delegate, probably one of the youngest Sanders delegates from the party, from the 24th Congressional District. To my right is Lillian Whitted, a professor of social sciences at SUNY, who has been canvassing for Senator Sanders and is an amazing intellect on a number of issues. We got a chance to talk about his 10-year-old son and his excitement and his support in the political process. So I'm just impressed with the generation of young activists who are even 10 years old interested in this political process. And I think our panelists can begin. I'll start with you, Maurice, if you want to just say a few words.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I got interested in Senator Sanders' campaign because he's been for the people, for us, before his presidential campaign. He's the only candidate who marched on Washington in 1963. He was arrested for protesting segregation in 1963. I was born in 1992. So just knowing that he's been fighting this fight for so long, and now he's running for president. It's rare that you'll see somebody do something for 50 years and then get the authority to make change on it and then stop. Too often we'll have police brutality and no one wants to say anything because it's like politically incorrect to speak up, but he has, and he will. We need a candidate that's going to speak to the issue. But we need a candidate that's willing to speak to the issues. He's been speaking against police brutality. You can find him on record talking about the stopping of private prisons and things of that nature as early as 1990. He's been fighting this good fight for a really long time, and we're getting really close to the finish line, and now it's more important than ever that we get involved, we get important. He's been fighting for me, so I feel I'm going to fight for him, and that's personally how I feel, and hopefully we get enough support and Senator Sanders can actually make this happen. We can make ourselves a more perfect union.
I do want to note before I ask Mr. Whitted to give his remarks that we've been fortunate to have been joined by Latrell Dunbar. Mr. Whitted, would you also just give us your insights into why you're supporting Senator Sanders?
Yes. The way I look at it, America needs a revolution now. Not a violent revolution, not overthrowing the government. America's had a series of revolutions to improve itself. When people were being displaced because of the Industrial Revolution, children working in factories canning fruit 12 hours a day, people working 12, 14 hours a day living in squalor, we had a revolution. It was called the Progressive Era. Millions were displaced by the failure of capitalism during the Great Depression. But another revolution called the New Deal. 1950, General Motors, when General Motors was financially on top of the world, General Motors had a treaty with the labor agreement with the United Auto Workers, the Treaty of Detroit, and then other companies followed suit, and it resulted in large part, not the only reason, but a major reason, for the development of the middle class, another revolution. We had a civil rights revolution that was definitely needed. But a revolution takes guts and people willing to take risks. Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Before he signed it, he was pressured not to sign it. The Southern Democrats said, if you do that, you're giving the South away to the Republican Party. Johnson didn't care about the status quo. He didn't care about the pressure from the party. He did the right thing. And the way I look at it now, the way the political system is structured, we need someone to challenge the status quo. And out of all the candidates running, Republican and Democrat, I think the only one who has that belief and that strength and that character to tell it like it is and challenge the status quo is Bernie Sanders. But for Bernie Sanders' revolution to work, other people have to follow suit. You know, the Obama so-called revolution wasn't really a revolution. The problem was other progressives, who's known as the most liberal senator in Congress, other progressives did not follow him. But some people were galvanized to vote, and unfortunately that was the Tea Party. Whenever the racial order is upset with the Tea Party in the 50s, you get the Dixiecrats. So Bernie has said himself that so this revolution can work. He has to become president, as in confident will, and other people, other progressives, have to follow suit and run for political office.
Latrell, do you want to add your voice to this?
I do. Thank you. Back in July or August, I started working for a nonprofit organization. I had lunch with the executive director and a couple of the board members. And just, briefly or casually during that conversation, one of the members said to me, we need to look at, take a look at Bernie Sanders. And ever since then, I haven't taken a high off of him. I echo what other African Americans are appreciating as far as racial equality. Healthcare for all is something that's for everybody. He's for everyone, disabled, LGBT community, just everyone. Native Americans, he appreciates diversity and differences and respects everyone as a human being. I recently graduated college, and Bernie echoes the important things that my ecology professor was saying about, how terrible the planet is in trouble. We're depleting our resources. Bernie's against fracking, which is depleting our precious oil resources and other resources. And climate change is very real, and it's very important to attack it, before it gets worse. I was married to a disabled veteran. Bernie he cares about what happens to our veterans once they return home. That's something that's important to me, and he's mainly, about peace and not war. So, one of the main reasons that I'm voting for Bernie is for my 3 sons. I brought them into this world, and they shouldn't feel like they don't belong. We are all human. And I want to share just an experience that I had with my 15-year-old son just last week in the school district. We went to his former junior high school, or elementary school, to visit and to pick up working papers for him. While we were there, he wanted to visit a couple of teachers who he had bonded with. We went upstairs, we got visitors passes, went upstairs, met with the teachers. I had to leave to pick up my older son from work, so I asked if he could stay because he wanted to catch up. They said okay. I left the building, so I'll be back. Not even before I reached my oldest son's job, I got a call from my son saying they kicked him out, they're going to call the police because he's on school grounds, he's waiting outside, comply when they ask him to leave. They treated him like he was, just a criminal. I think my son loves, mentoring the younger kids, and as I was walking down the hall, they're like, "Oh, where's my brother Rashad?" They look up to him, but my son was not treated that way by the staff. And it starts in the school. The racial inequality starts in the school, and I think that Bernie Sanders is someone that will address these things. So it's very important that he gets the role.
Now, before we open it up to questions,
Latrell, would you go ahead and read this?
Yes, I would like to read a statement from the Alliance Network and their endorsement of Bernie Sanders. Following Bernie Sanders' inspiring talk on April 12, 2016 at the On Center, the Alliance Network is proud to announce our endorsement of the Vermont Senator as a Democratic presidential candidate. Alliance Network leaders and supporters were part of a private meeting with Senator Sanders prior to his address. The Alliance Network brought together leaders of the African American community, Latino community, leaders from the Onondaga and Mohawk nations, faith-based community leaders, and individuals across all political party lines to hear Sanders' vision for a more just and inclusive nation. The energetic crowd of over 5,000 who came out during the work and school day was a powerful example of the enthusiasm Senator Sanders has generated in his campaign. During his address, the senator spoke movingly of the failed war on drugs and its devastating consequences for communities of color. He offered a strong indictment of the criminal justice and policing system, which makes the United States the incarceration capital of the world. People of color trapped in that system in far greater numbers than our proportion of the population. Senator Sanders spoke of the need to increase funding to struggling urban schools and make public colleges and universities tuition-free. The Alliance Network leadership was deeply impressed with the sincere and passionate commitment displayed by Senator Sanders to address the systemic nature of racism in the United States. He spoke about the great suffering and broken treaties experienced by Native Americans. Bernie called for comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. Senator Sanders' economic plans call for a national increase on the minimum wage, strengthening Social Security, reducing inequality, and spearheading massive infrastructure projects which would rebuild communities and put millions of people to work in good-paying jobs. Perhaps most important to us is Senator Sanders' prophetic call to revitalize democracy in the United States. Our young people feel neglected and marginalized by a system that offers them a poor education and a pipeline to prison. They see few job prospects with little respect. Senator Sanders' message and policies offer us the best hope in decades to reverse these destructive trends and restore hope to our young people and communities. In addition to his words and stated policy positions, Senator Sanders has consistently stood up for disenfranchised people throughout his 3.5 decades in politics. The Alliance Network has worked to advance the social, economic, health, youth, and political concerns of African American and Latino communities in Central New York for 20 years. In supporting Senator Sanders, we join key leaders such as musician and social activist Harry Belafonte, filmmaker Spike Lee, actress Rosario Dawson, actor Danny Glover, rapper Michael Killer Mike Render, best-selling authors Michelle Alexander and Ta-Nehisi Coates, professor and activist Cornel West, Hawaii Congresswoman and former Vice Chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, Tulsi Gabbard, Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva, and former NAACP President Benjamin Jones.
There is a direction, I think, that we all here spoke of, and I thank them for lending their voice to this conversation. What's fascinating is that we're having a political dialogue in this country that wouldn't have otherwise existed. We're literally in a battle for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party at this point. The Republicans also have their own battle, and it's a little more troubling than perhaps some would like. But on this side of the aisle, we're having a legitimate conversation about the values that we have as a party, the direction our country needs to go towards, and the future that we envision. And while I think this side of the conversation is a lot better, I think as we all expressed here, we need to be very clear about our positions, we need to be very defensive of our positions, and we need to understand very clearly that these issues affect people in such ways, locally, regionally, across the world, that we have a very unique responsibility to do something about it. I was excited to see the thousands of people who were at the rally, who were energized, who otherwise wouldn't have been in the political process. We will need those people in November in the general election. And I think it's important for us to understand that the message that Senator Sanders is espousing, the direction that he's trying to push the country, has motivated millions of people. If we want to even talk about the fact of how he's financing this campaign, a radical shift in our traditional campaign finance system. We have already begun a political revolution in this country. And I think that revolution is not going to end, and I certainly believe that will continue irrespective of who the nominee winds up being and whoever winds up being in the White House. It doesn't end at the ballot box, it only begins. And so I leave this now for questions from the audience. Yes?
Anybody can take this on the panel, but obviously the end goal is for Bernie Sanders to become president of the United States, but the roadblock right now would be what's going on with the primary. So what are kind of the factors that distinguish Bernie Sanders' relationship with African Americans and Hillary Clinton's relationship with African Americans, and sort of how they intend to serve that community?
Well, as you probably know, Bernie Sanders was involved in the civil rights movement. Bernie Sanders did go to jail, like thousands of other people involved in civil rights protests. Bernie Sanders was the same person then as he is today. The Clintons, on the other hand, have the crime bill that her husband signed disproportionately affected African Americans, and it added to the rate, the Freudian slip, it added to the drug war, which is really, in large part, a race war. But Bernie has been consistent. I wanted to add another thing. As we know, whether it's health care, whether it's unemployment, all these issues disproportionately affect African Americans. So Bernie would make it better for everybody. To answer your question, I would distinguish him because he's been consistent. And also, Hillary did say many things, or a few things, in the 2008 election against Obama that many people, like myself, considered racist.
I also distinguish him in how he handles protesters. I think everyone, seen the Black Lives Matters protesters that appeared at one of his rallies. He shook their hand, listened to what they had to say, whereas in contrast, Hillary had a Black Lives Matter or a protester escorted out so that she could get back to the matters. It speaks volumes to me.
I think both candidates are tremendously qualified. I think Secretary Clinton has one of probably the most impressive resumes for a person running for president. I think that she exemplifies a person who has been dedicating her life to public service. My contrast, though, is that, and I think I alluded to it earlier, we cannot afford to find a middle ground at this point in our country's history. And I think I'm being very clear about that. With the issues that we have in front of us, and these aren't just African American issues. African Americans are not a monolith. We don't all have the same ideas, we don't all care about the same issues. We're all not affected. I am a college graduate, I have a lot more privilege than many other African Americans, and I think it's important to own that and express that. But having grown up in the South Bronx, having grown up in poverty, having had the opportunities that I've had, I know that we cannot take incremental steps to address those issues. There are over 700,000 people in New York City's public housing system. There are thousands of people in Syracuse who live in concentrated poverty. These are issues that we cannot incrementally address. We can't say we can take 10% off. We can't say we can reduce it by, we need to have a policy whereby we say we need to eradicate poverty in all of its forms and make that our goalpost. We can't make our goalpost, we have to reduce poverty by 50%. It's not acceptable. And I think that we need to be clear about that, and I think we need to be putting our feet in the ground. And any negotiator, and I've done negotiations at the United Nations, so I've got a little bit of knowledge of negotiations, any negotiator puts their red line and tells you where they're going to meet you. You can't put your red line halfway where the person is because you'll compromise further where you need to be. And I think that's the stark difference between the two.
And as Bernie said, you can't get millions of dollars from Wall Street, millions of dollars from corporations to say you're going to do things for the average person. Because basically, again, Bernie's revolution is about, which disproportionately would help African Americans, is that people are playing by the rules and it's not working. The system as it's designed is unfair. Citizens United, for example, Bernie would lobby and struggle and do all he can to overturn Citizens United. I'm not sure if Hillary Rodham would do that. Because the point is, she's part of the system. And I think it's the fact that Bernie Sanders has raised so much money and the average contribution is only $27, but millions and millions of people have given him the money. That shows that so many Americans feel what he's speaking. And I saw him at the rally Tuesday. I've been to a lot of rallies my entire life, and I've never seen a crowd so energized, so in tune. He is in tune with the frustration of the average American. And when things happen and the system doesn't work, you want someone outside the system. Either you go to the dark side, which has happened throughout history, hatred, xenophobia, scapegoating, nativism, which is Donald Trump, or you go to the other side and say, the system is wrong, we have to restructure it, and we have to improve it so it can work for everybody. And obviously Bernie Sanders is the latter.
Yes.
So what do you hope to really hear from Bernie Sanders today at the national convention?
The National Action Network.
Yes.
Yeah. You can please take this.
Just more of the same. He's been saying a lot of the right things. I'm hoping that he doesn't change his rhetoric. Hopefully he addresses the income equality in this nation, which is outrageous. Most of the new wealth that has come into this country since 1990 has gone to the top 1%. He's been fighting for us. He's been fighting for the working people, for the lower people, for poverty, and just more of that. Nothing in particular.
The National Action Network is an important organization founded in 1991. They've done a tremendous amount of work throughout over 2 decades that they've been in existence, addressing criminal justice reform issues, addressing international issues from things that are happening in Puerto Rico and elsewhere around the world, from addressing the war in Iraq. What I hope and expect and anticipate Senator Sanders to be saying today is directed towards the interrelation between our political system, how it's financed, and the reasons why we're unable to address the issues that are important to us today. You know, people say Senator Sanders is a single issue candidate. Perhaps he is, because the single reason why we can't address any of the issues in our economy, in our political system, is because we have campaign finance issues. We can't address climate change because the oil and fossil fuel industry invests heavily to ensure that we don't address it. We can't address criminal justice reform because the prison industrial complex pays heavily to contributions for politicians to go particular ways. We can't address many of the issues that we have until we remove money out of politics. It is just impossible. And I think what's most remarkable, as you alluded to, is the fact that millions of people have shown that we do not need to have corporations and very wealthy people funding a campaign to make a person viable. That in fact, millions of people across the country of different stripes, of different income levels, can actually have a direct impact in forcing the message of this country, pushing politicians to go in direction, and that if we had a public finance system for our elections, then I do believe that we'd be able to have people less beholden to the powers that be. Lastly, every person who's ever run for office, who is an elected person today, they will tell you that they spend 80% of their time raising money. That is a gross misuse of the public's time, the public's funds, because we are paying them, and it's inappropriate to spend 20% of the time legislating when we have issues of concentrated poverty, of segregation. We are in Onondaga County, named after the Onondaga Nation, of people who have been disenfranchised, whose treaties have been broken. And we don't have a great policy on addressing segregation in this community, the fourth most segregated county in this country. I think it's deplorable, and we need to address it. And I hope Senator Sanders not just talks about the importance of these issues and connects the dots for people, but also makes it very clear on what he, in his capacity as president, could do to address them. Any other questions?
With Syracuse's 50% child poverty rate and rising, how do you think Senator Sanders' policies would reduce that?
Anyone wants to?
Maurice?
Okay. Senator Sanders' policies, they're based on largely the income equality gap. Like raising the minimum wage, that's a nice concrete example of what could be done to address the poverty in Syracuse. Because if you give the money to the people who are making minimum wage, and those are usually people who need it. Those are people in poverty. Those are people working 2 and 3 jobs, struggling to take care of their families. So that's just one like small example. There are a bunch of examples how that could help. Universal health care, for example. That would give health care to people who need it, people who are in poverty. So a lot of his plans, they work together in order to make us a more perfect union, in order to bring us up. So those are just 2 examples.
And also what the government does the bidding of corporations and the wealthy, because that's where they get their money. Senator Sanders doesn't. If we could overturn Citizens United, then the government could do the bidding of the average person. For instance, since the 1970s, the government has cut back tremendously the financing of housing, urban development, the financing of affordable housing, low-cost affordable housing, low-cost government-owned affordable housing. The government doesn't do that as much as it did during the 1960s and 1970s because the rich have more control over the system. And if we focus on that issue, everything else will eventually fall into place.
You know, to add to that, you know, I actually worked with the government of Panama at the United Nations. I was advising the government of Panama, actually most recently until September of this year. We know in the news of the Panama Papers. Panama, by the way, is not the only country where people hide their money in tax havens. There are trillions of dollars, I don't say billions or millions, there are trillions of dollars of wealth that are hidden across the world in tax havens. There are, you know, trillions of dollars of money hidden in other parts of the world through what's called corporate inversion. There is a lot of money in a lot of places where public policy has enabled the very wealthy and corporations to hide their money in these tax havens, to skirt off on their tax responsibilities. On an individual level, the government has favored this foolish policy of trickle-down economics, where we allow the wealthy to further reduce their tax burden. And this is directly at the expense of infrastructure needs. This is directly at the expense of public education. This is directly at the expense of public, we talk about affordable housing, but it's directly at the expense of public housing. This is the kind of money that can create an energy revolution in this country, where we could be creating, as opposed to a cradle to prison pipeline, we could be creating a school to job pipeline that we could fund public education through university. We could fund healthcare. We could fund renewable energy, which we desperately need. We can be recreating and reimagining what the social contract that we have. I think at this point in history, what I believe Senator Sanders and what I believe the direction we need to be going in and how he will directly address concentrated poverty is surrounded by getting people to understand very clearly that the system's rigged against all of us, whether you're white or black, whether you're rich or poor, that it is unsustainable for us to keep these type of policies, that if we don't address them, that we will be in a situation where we will not be able to recover from. And I think Senator Sanders speaks to it directly. He speaks to it forcefully. He's forced other candidates in the campaign to move their positions closer to that position. And what I think is most fascinating, I mean, I actually buy the idea of a down ticket opportunity. If you get enough people inspired and engaged in the political process, they're not just going to vote for him. We may have a chance to win the Senate. We may have a chance to win the House, which 6 months ago did not look possible. And so, yes, I do believe that this campaign is a campaign for the people. I think it's a campaign for all of us. And again, as I said earlier, concentrated poverty doesn't just affect African American and Latinos. It certainly directly affects African American and Latinos, but it affects all of us. It's why our credit rating is so low. It's why our graduation rates are so low. It's why we're not able to create the kind of jobs that we need to be able to empower this community. It's why we're losing the population that we have in Syracuse. And I think that all of these issues, actually I know all these issues to be interconnected. I think if we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, obviously there's a little bit of a disparity in the superdelegate situation, and what are some of the things that you think Bernie Sanders needs to do maybe to close that gap heading into the convention, and do you see this as a situation, going against Hillary Clinton that's going to last all the way until the convention? Anybody can answer, all of you.
Well, you are a delegate. This might be a question.
That's my area of expertise. Actually, I think the superdelegate situation is interesting because the superdelegates, they're actually like the party elites, supposedly the Democratic Party, and hopefully we have more situations like Minnesota, where after Bernie Sanders won Minnesota, the superdelegates from Minnesota, they decided to switch their votes to align with what the state voted. I would expect that more would do that just for the sake of their own candidacies, because at some point they will be up for election, and their people who voted for Bernie Sanders, hopefully they ask, why didn't you align your vote with us? Because the people's voice is what should matter. I don't believe we should have superdelegates. No one person their vote shouldn't be more than the next person's, even if they do have a party elite position. So what may end up happening is they won't switch because they're loyal to the establishment, they're loyal to the Democratic Party. But when their elections come up, their constituents, their people who they represent, they're going to ask, they're going to say, why didn't you vote the same way we did? We obviously feel a certain way. And it's going to be interesting to see if the superdelegates don't budge, because they may be forfeiting their position. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
I'm not a delegate, I'm not a superdelegate, and we have our resident delegate expert here. I would only add that in both parties, both the Democratic and Republican Party, what this election has been able to do is to show us how undemocratic our nomination process is. That in fact, when we think that we're voting for someone to represent us, that in fact that may not actually happen. That very connected people may be the ones who determine the fate, irrespective of the fact that we may have all voted. And I think what this has done, and what has been happening over the last several decades, is to force the democratization of our electoral system and our electoral process. And I'm happy that at least we're having this conversation. I mean, there used to be a point where the state legislatures, right, selected the Senate, right? The people didn't have that, and the people fought, and we got that right. And we have an electoral college system where in 2000, and I remember that very clearly, President Bush did not win the popular vote, but he won the electoral college vote. And I think that was the beginning of the awakening of the average person to realize, in every sense of the word, whether it's our financial system, whether it's our political system, whether it's our electoral system, that the system has been rigged against us, the average person. And I'm not saying this to disparage anyone, because I actually, again, I was one of those people who wanted to vote for Secretary Clinton on April 19th. I was one of those people who wanted to see a woman president. I still do. I was one of those people who felt so impassioned that we needed to take a new direction, that I couldn't just stand by idly and allow my desire to make history blind my judgment to understanding what we need as a country. And I think we need to be clear that our super delegate situation, that the delegate process, the process by which we elect and appoint and nominate folks to represent us to go against the other parties, needs also some radical shifts and some radical changes. And that it should be a more inclusive process. It should be a process where one vote per one person, where a group of party leaders can't shift the direction and the will of the people. And I think that we need to be honest and own that, and we need to be forceful in our direction towards creating a more democratic system.
I'd just like to add, we need a real democracy, not a slip veneer of democracy. Because we do have a democracy now, as long as you don't get someone like Donald Trump. We do have a democracy now, as long as you don't get a close election like Bush versus Gore. So really, we don't have a democracy, and I think that is definitely going to change, especially after this election cycle. I think this election cycle is good for America, despite the advent of Donald Trump, because it shows how unfair, unequal the system is, how the system is stacked against the average person. When the conservative line has been, since the early 90s, is that the person is to blame for their lot in life. And also, I think what it's going to do, it's going to get rid of the radicals. You know, you listen to talk radio, these conservatives are always talking about Ronald Reagan this, Ronald Reagan that Ronald Reagan's a prophet. They forgot that when the deficit got so high, Ronald Reagan raised taxes. We got the George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes. When the deficit got so high, he raised taxes. But we have a group of radicals, and it's not working, and people are fed up. And white, working class men especially aren't buying into that. We'll vote for these people who cater to the rich, but I can open up my business and I can become rich. Or I'll vote for these people that cater to the rich, but it'll trickle down to me. It's not trickling down. They're not becoming rich. So I think the system is going to change.
The only other thing I would say is I think we're having a sustained conversation about our social contract. What is the responsibility of each American to each other? Do we truly live in one country in a more perfect union? Are we truly recognizing our collective humanity? And if we're not, then we're in trouble. But inevitably, I have hope. I have hope that the American people make the right decision. It's why Senator Sanders is still competitive. It's why he's still around. In spite of the fact that everyone said that there's no possible way. And I remember in 2004, a lot of folks said Barack Obama was impossible, that those ideas were impossible, that we could never achieve this, and that we should wait on the sidelines. And millions of people ignored what everyone told them would happen. Millions of people came out and voted. A new political coalition was created. And it's something that I believe whomever becomes the next president, and I'm sure they will be a Democrat, will push this forward. And I'm excited to be a part of that process, as I'm sure the rest of us are. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We thank you for having us. And if you all have any further questions, I'm sure each of us can speak to you privately and on the side. Thank you.